Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, more problems for Jeremy Corbyn and anti-Semitism this week. A roundtable meeting organised by the Labour leader has been postponed after two of the largest Jewish organisations said they would not attend. The Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Jewish Leadership Council will meet Jeremy Corbyn separately on Tuesday, but not at the group meeting. It's reportedly because an invitation was extended to the Jewish Voice for Labour. They are the group which organised a counter-demonstration last month against the Enough is Enough march on anti-Semitism at Parliament Square. Speaking on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry said she was angry that anti-Semitism still appeared to be an issue in her party.
I'm fed up with it. I'm fed up with hearing about it. I'm fed up with hearing this dreadful stuff. I'm fed up with meeting people on the street as well. I mean, I think that, you know, this whole issue has been raised and people feel that it's fine to come up and talk to you in the most appalling terms, quite frankly. I spoke to somebody last weekend and I was really shocked to suddenly see the way in which the conversation turned, and she thought that she was supportive of Labour and she thought she was supportive of me, and I had to make it clear that actually that was not acceptable. And yeah, I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible, and we will sort this out.
Emily Thornberry there. Well, joining us here is Joseph Finlay. He is a member of Jewish Voice for Labour. Welcome to the programme. And before I come to you, I'm just going to ask Thangham, what happened to you after you attended the Enough is Enough anti-Semitism protest last month outside Parliament?
I think what happened, one of the main things that happened that I want to tell people about is the fact that Jewish people in my constituency got in touch with me to tell me that they were glad that I understand that anti-Semitism isn't something that can be ranked. It isn't something that we talk about as we're better or worse than the Tory party. It's something that if there's any expression of anti-Semitism at all in a political party, it needs tackling. And they were proud of the fact that I went, and they were glad that I went, and I'm glad that I was standing up for them.
But parts of your constituency Labour Party weren't pleased.
Yes, and you'd have to ask them about that. But in my view, I think that what's important is that Jewish people feel welcome and safe, and that Jews in my social life, who I've known for years, who've told me that they don't know if they can vote Labour again, I think that's awful, because Jewish people should be able to vote Labour without having to think, is this party more or less anti-Semitic than the Tory party? That's not something we should be proud of.
Right. So is there a problem within your party?
Well, as Emily Thornberry said, yes, there is something which needs dealing with. Jeremy said it, John McDonnell said it, Jenny Thornberry, the incoming General Secretary, has said it, and I'm glad that my party is taking action and that we're implementing the recommendations of the Chakrabarti report. We're investigating thoroughly and swiftly the allegations that have been made over the last few months and years.
But you faced two critical motions from your constituency Labour Party. What was that meeting like? You were pretty well hauled to explain yourself, weren't you?
Yes, and I think that that's a pity, but I also know that the people I was standing up for are people who know that my motivations were to stand up against anti-Semitism, and that as an elected member of the Labour Party, elected representative, I have a responsibility, because we are all of us responsible for challenging anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Right, but how is the party dealing with it if members of your local party said you shouldn't have joined the rally and you were asked to agree that claims of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and by Jeremy Corbyn are unfounded and untrue and part of a plot?
Well, Jeremy said that week that he had confidence in me and that I was a valued member of his team.
Right. Joseph, what do you think about that? Was that really appropriate that because Thangham had gone on that demonstration that she was hauled to her constituency Labour Party to explain herself?
No, I don't think it was. I obviously don't know what happened at the meeting, but I think you have every right to go to that demonstration and support your constituents, and that's absolutely right, and I don't think that should be criticised. So,
but it was by the constituency Labour Party, and they asked her to agree that claims of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party are unfounded and untrue. Do you think that too?
No, I think that's an unwise form of words, and I wouldn't support that. Look, I think people get very angry and they think that... look, what I want to say is broadly, I think anti-Semitism must be never tolerated anywhere on the political spectrum. I think what's a problem is when that gets politicised, when people say it's only the Labour Party or it's only one faction of the Labour Party. That actually doesn't help us defeat anti-Semitism. That makes people think it's all about factionalism and party politics. It isn't.
True?
What?
That there is anti-Semitism in one faction of the Labour Party?
I think anti-Semitism in all politics and all of society. I think there's racism in all politics and all society. And the way you tackle that is by tackling it across the board with broad-based education, broad-based anti-racism training.
Right. Who are Jewish Voice for Labour? Because our viewers may not know. And who do you represent?
We are a Jewish group in the Labour Party for Jews in Labour to express their Jewishness, come together, campaign for Labour. We have hundreds of Jewish Labour members, and we work together. We do culture, we do politics, and like many groups, there are many cultural groups within the Labour Party, and we're one of them.
Right. So why are other Jewish groups not happy to sit with you round a table with Jeremy Corbyn to talk about anti-Semitism?
The Jewish community is very diverse. The idea that there is one Jewish community is not actually correct. And the thing about community outreach is it's a little bit naive to think you can invite everyone around one round table and everyone will agree to speak to everyone else.
But you've just said,
it's not like that.
Like all other Jewish groups, anti-Semitism is something that shouldn't exist in society. So why do you think they don't want you there?
You have to ask them. I think there's always been divisions within the Jewish community, and lots of people don't like each other. And I think what's happened now is Jeremy Corbyn has said, OK, I'll meet every group individually, talk to you separately, get your insights and feed that back in how we can improve our anti-racism training. I think that's a sensible policy going forward.
I mean, is it partly because you don't recognise, in the same way that other Jewish groups do, what anti-Semitism is or what is deemed to be anti-Semitic?
No, I mean, we accept anti-Semitism as a reality and we combat it.
Sure.
There are some politicised groups. I'm not talking about any mainstream groups that definitely blur the lines with criticism of Israel. We don't accept that. There must be a strict division between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism, and those that use anti-Semitic language in criticising Israel are wrong, and I stand against that.
Right. So if we look at the motion from some of the members in Bristol West, it said the anti-Semitism issue has been weaponised to damage Jeremy Corbyn. And it went on to say, when people see unprecedented wealth in the private hands of a few, it is reasonable that they seek out explanations. Does that sound anti-Semitic? It
does sound pretty problematic. And I was in touch with a member who claimed that this was nothing to do with Jews as an expression of capitalism and inequality. I don't know. It definitely doesn't sound great. So
is it anti-Semitic?
Well, you have to understand it's not always a binary. It's not always anti-Semitic or it isn't.
Well, it is. You said it's problematic and you said it's inappropriate. Is it anti-Semitic to imply that Jews have an unprecedented amount of wealth in their hands?
Yes.
Right.
I don't know if that's what the motion was doing, but yes.
Well, it followed.
It is.
Right. But do you think that was anti-Semitic?
Yes.
Right, you do. OK.
I want to make the point that discourse is complex and you can't always draw fine lines on this, and that doesn't actually help us to try and say that it's always A or B.
But then
and
how do you define as a party when people are being anti-Semitic if there isn't a general agreement of what constitutes anti-Semitism? You both agreed that that was. Let me ask you another question. I mean, I think you did agree, didn't you? Is it racist to say that Jews are overrepresented in the media and in the world of banking?
Yes.
Right, that is racist.
Because it presumes there's correct representation, which is not how the world works.
Right.
For individuals.
Right, OK. So you do have a specific idea of what is anti-Semitic.
Hatred of Jews. I mean, it's not complex. I mean, we don't need to have long definitions to understand that hatred of Jews, like hatred of black people, hatred of Asian people, is racism.
Right, so that's not being politicised, is it? That's not the issue being politicised.
What I'm concerned about is when you have figures like Norman Tebbit, who was at that demonstration. And Norman Tebbit invented the cricket test to talk about dual loyalties. Now, someone like that is not an anti-racist, and we cannot treat them as authority. So that's what bothers me.
Is there a witch hunt against Jeremy Corbyn? Is this being used as a smear?
I think some people are politicising this with the Conservative Party. I think some people more broadly, and that's the problem for me. You must treat it across the board. When you try and make it about one party, it actually damages the fight against anti-Semitism.
Do you agree with that, or is this a problem for Labour?
I'm a representative of the Labour Party. I'm not a representative of the Tory Party. And so when there's anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, when it's against Labour members of Parliament, it is my responsibility as another Labour member of Parliament to take it on, no matter how uncomfortable that is, and it is uncomfortable.
Is it good enough to say that it should be investigated in all parts of the political spectrum and it should be looked at from all sides rather than focusing on Labour?
It's up to the Tory Party to do their own investigating. In the Labour Party, we have values that we share that are about challenging inequality, and it's living out our values. In living out our values, that does mean listening to people who have difficult things to say to us and uncomfortable things that we have to deal with, and looking them in the eye and being willing to say we have a problem that we need to deal with. Talk about whether or not the Tories are more or less anti-Semitic than the Labour Party is irrelevant. I'm an elected member member of the Labour Party, and it is my job to help make sure that there is absolutely no anti-Semitism or tolerance of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic sounding language in the Labour Party.
Do you think Ken Livingstone should finally be kicked out of the party?
Well,
or
he's
should he be...
he's suspended at the moment, and I'm not part of that investigation.
All right, do you think he should be kicked out of the party?
I think he was rightfully suspended. I think he said very offensive things. Whether or not he should be expelled, they've
been looking at it for 2 years.
Look, it's basically the definition of a hard case. It's a bad interpretation of history. What he said, he was talking about historical fact, gave a bad interpretation of that. That's why it's such a hard case. I think he was offensive. I think he's continually been offensive and should apologise for those things. Yes. Whether that's anti-Semitism, that's another hard case. And that's what I'm trying to say to your viewers. Don't think it's always easy. You have to work hard to unpick this stuff.
So you don't think he was necessarily anti-Semitic?
No, I think he was offensive.
Right. So you don't think he should be kicked out?
I think being offensive is a reason to be suspended and possibly to be kicked out. I'm not in charge of that choice.
I mean, I think that one of the things that the General Secretary has said, and I believe her, is that she will expedite and get on with making sure those investigations are carried out fairly and swiftly, and I hope that that one is.
Due process.
Thank you very much for coming in.